Hi everyone, it's Sophia from ATA Notes, and today I'm hosting our HSC Studies of Religion July lecture. I'm not sure if any of you guys had come to any of our previous lectures, whether it was for SOR or another subject, or if you've seen me on the ATA Notes TikTok possibly. But my name is Sophia. I've graduated in 2021, so I'm still pretty fresh out of school. And I got a 96.3 ATA then. These were some of my marks, but for the sake of this lecture, I got a 94 in Studies of Religion 2 unit, and I'm studying a Bachelor of Secondary Education at the University of Sydney to become a high school English and Business Studies teacher. But that's about it with me. We'll get going on to the lecture. So for today's lecture, guys, it's always really hard with studies of religion because everyone is doing all the different religions. And it's also hard because there's extra topics for SOR2, but a lot of you guys are here for SOR1, but then we don't want to neglect the ones that are here for SOR2, so it's really hard to go back and forth. So what we're doing today is a course study summary, which is what everyone does, whether you're doing SOR1 or 2. It's Aboriginal spirituality and post 1945. Then we're going to go into the religious depth studies and some of just the general points for each of the religions, and then go over religion and peace, which is a specific topic on studies of religion, the syllabus for studies of religion 2 unit. So our aim for today is to really be equipped with SOR exam techniques and strategies to just kind of increase your confidence in SOR, because I promise you guys it is the easiest. It is probably one of the easiest subjects you're doing. I'm not sure what subjects you guys are doing to make an assumption like that, but it is a very easy subject to do well in, and it really just relies on understanding the content and memorizing it. It's not even so much applying it, and when you are applying it, it really just comes down to your structure, but otherwise it is purely memorizing. And in that memorizing, just making sure you actually understand it, so then you can write about it adequately. We're also going to clarify the requirements of your depth studies and how to execute them, and just make sure that you're ready to approach the core, including general just study skills for SOR. So it's a pretty general SOR lecture. Whether you're doing SOR1 or SOR2, it's going to relate. Now, if you are doing SOR1, our last section on religion and peace, you're free to leave early. And just some housekeeping for this lecture before we get started. This lecture is recorded, so you can come back to it all the way up until your HSC SOR exam. So if you have somewhere to go or you get bored because it is a pretty long lecture and we're going through a lot, I take no offense, you're all good to close it. And you can come back to the recording and go back to specific sections if you like. So when we do get up to religion and peace, if you're doing SOR1, you're all good to go, because that's specific SOR2 content. That's why we kept it last. But otherwise, you can also download these slides. There should be a resource button somewhere on the screen. I don't know where to point, but there will be a resource button on the screen. And once you click that, you'll be able to download these slides, and have a copy of them. So it's completely up to you if you want to write the notes, and take notes as I'm talking, or if you want to type notes, or if you just want to sit and listen, have a little bit of a watch. It's completely up to you what you want to take from it. I know I used to come to the ATA Notes lectures, and because I could download the slides, I just download them and I just like listen and ask any questions as we were going, but completely up to you. And then I would use those downloaded slides to help add to my study and just make sure I had everything in there. But up to you, everyone's free to do what they like. When this is posted at the specific time, we're also going to have the live chat, so I'll be in the live chat, and hopefully you guys are talking and we can have a little bit of a chat about SOR. But if you do have any questions about studies of religion 1 or 2, even if they are specific ones on your significant person or your significant practice, I'm more than happy to help out. And if you do just have general questions about HSC, about studying year 12 early entry, anything that's got to do with that, I'm happy to have a chat, guys, so just let me know. But let's get started on the course study. It's just a crash course. I'm going to try and go through it as quickly as possible, only because at this point it should be revision. Now, for the course study and the way that the exam is structured, you're only going to get the 5 marker and the 10 mark multiple choice. So you can only really get assessed in that way for SOR. So knowing it in this super great detail just isn't necessary. It is pretty short. When we're looking at contemporary Aboriginal spiritualities, there's not Um, it's not like a full page worth of dot points and it's split up with post 1945. We're going to start with contemporary Aboriginal spiritualities, but I wanted to put this on here to start off with because this syllabus is your best friend in SOR. The syllabus is so important. If you got, they will take questions word for word, and like word for word in my trials, our 5 marker was discuss how Aboriginal spirituality is determined by the dreaming. So then naturally you're going to bring up the 3 dash points. But they've done the same for discuss the continuing effect of dispossession, and it's the 3 dot points, or outline the importance of native title. And the questions are so predictable in SOR, guys. I don't want to sound super repetitive, and I'm already sounding repetitive because I was talking about how easy SOR is. But in that case, there's not many syllabuses that are like this, that they just take the questions so directly and it's almost to the point that you can guess. Like, I'm very confident, I don't know any of you guys personally watching, but I'm very confident that you have probably never come across a question in SOR and been like, oh, what am I going to do? Especially for these topics, because they're just so based off and kind of founded and coded in the syllabus, which is why the syllabus is your best friend. If your notes aren't separated by the syllabus, I definitely recommend it. And I really do recommend memorizing syllabus. Our teacher used to get us to fill in the blanks for the syllabus just to make sure that we knew it. And the last thing that I looked at before going into my SOR trials and my SOR trial and my SOR HSC wasn't my actual notes, it was the syllabus. And just going over and just making sure I know which dashes belong to which dot points and what belongs where. It makes such a game changer, and especially in this first and in the core, the questions are just straight from it. So it's in your best interest. My teacher, what she would get us to do was to write practice questions based off the learn tos. And we had written a practice. She was a past HSC marker, and she put a lot of work on like the 5 markers and getting those marks. So we had written a 5 marker on every single dot point and dash in this learn to. And at the time I was very angry. I was like, I don't want to write like a 5 marker on every single point, and we did it for post 1945 as well. But looking back at how much that helped, there was never a question that I received where I was like, oh, I don't know what to do, because just by practicing that, and I'm not saying all of you guys have to go and write a 5 marker for all of it now, but you should, when you're reading through the syllabus, you should feel confident, okay, I know how to write a 5 marker solely on kinship or solely on the stolen generations. And if you don't, that's your indicator to go back to your notes and to add to them. Now, I want to talk a little bit about study advice. I promise I am going to get to the core, but SOR, I feel like there's not much study advice out there. At this point in SOR, if you have not finished your notes, it depends how far you are on. I promise you, you can get these notes done in a day for the entire core in a couple hours, because you don't need that much on each point. Again, the max that they can ask you is a 5 marker. You're not getting an essay. It can't be anything more than 5 marks, and only one of the topics will come up, like one dot point, and potentially the dashes will come up. They're not going to ask and like interlink all of them together. So there's no point putting in this like really extensive study. Like, it's much more worthwhile putting in that extensive study to your significant person and your significant practice and your teaching, only because that can be assessed in such greater detail, especially as like a 20 mark essay. But for this, you know that the max is going to be a 5 marker, so it doesn't need to be anything too dramatic. Now, it depends how far behind you are on SOR, and no judgment in this house, because it is so easy to fall behind on SOR, and it's really easy to fall behind because SOR honestly can get really dull and repetitive. I think the content itself isn't really hard. It's pretty decent to understand. There's just a lot of it, and it's honestly so much memorizing. And if it feels really repetitive and you get like really bored in class, I feel behind on notes all the time and would have to catch up. It depends how far behind you are. If you have no notes, and your trials are in like 2-3 weeks, I don't recommend writing your own and starting now, only because you've got like a whole year's worth of content to catch up on. Instead, I recommend just honestly going online and using online free notes. There's so many that you can find. Just search like SOR full notes, and you can search like SOR Christianity notes, SOR Islam notes, depending on what religious faith you're doing. But Otherwise, I don't think you need to, because it's just an extra step, because you're going to write those notes, then you have to study and learn those notes. You can also, hopefully, from this lecture, are going to take away that you should be memorizing the syllabus, and then also practice papers and practice responses. It's just a lot to it, and in that short time frame, adding that pressure to yourself just isn't necessary when the content in SOR is all the same. And I feel like there's this weird stigma about like using other people's notes, but like I did it for SOR as well. I did it and I still got a 94. Like the content stays the same, especially for these topics. There's some really good summaries online. And by the end of full HSC, I had my own notes and I made my own summaries just because I had a bit more time. But my class notes were pretty long and like just pretty jam-packed, and I found quite a few good summaries online. So I just really recommend it. If you're not up to date with it, or if you feel like your notes are just too clunky and you don't know what to do, there's a lot of good work, thankfully online. Um, but otherwise, studying for SOR, if you are on top of your notes, or if like maybe you've just got one topic, two topics to catch up on, it's still in your best interest to catch up on those. I definitely recommend it. I'm just saying, for people that barely have any notes at all, don't bother. Um, and you can, on it, like if you want to bother, you can do it after trials. I just think with trials around the corner, you're better off just going straight to like learning and understanding the content, which is going to be exactly the same if you get like condensed notes online. But if you only have like one topic, or maybe you like neglected, you didn't finish these ones and you're halfway through, definitely finish it. It's definitely in your best interest then. It's only as like if you don't have notes at all, you barely have any, that I'd say don't bother. Otherwise, guys, SOR to study for is really just practice questions. It's practice questions. The syllabus has not changed. Let me tell you this gem. The syllabus has not changed since 2009. So there are so many papers. There's over 10 papers that you can sit, and you can imagine with a syllabus like this, kind of like tight, and like there's honestly not too much content like going around, that they ask the same questions on repeat. And the more past papers you sit, and I say that, but you don't even necessarily have to sit them. Like you don't have to sit every single past paper from 2009 to 2022 to get a band 6. I mean, like, great if you want to, and great if you have the time to, and great if you can, but you don't have to. But even just exposing yourself to the different questions and sitting with them, opening them on your laptop, being like, okay, I'll study for SOR for 30 minutes, but I'm going to go through the 2020 to 2022, the three papers, and I'm going to look at the different questions and think, okay, how would I structure it? What dashes would I bring up? What would my thesis be? And just like looking at the question, you don't necessarily have to write it, because I think like the SOR paper, well, it depends whether you're sitting SOR 1 or SOR 2. But if you are sitting SOR 2, it's a 3-hour paper, and sitting down for 3 hours, and writing the short answers, then the multiple choice, then your short answers on your like two religions, then your religious essay on 1 on 20, and then your religion and peace essay. It's just we just keep it just keeps going. It just keeps going on. And yeah, we're just not loving it. So that's why I really recommend that if you're not going the best with past papers, and it's definitely hard for SOR. If it's SOR 1, I really do recommend just sitting it and getting used to timing, because it is a shorter exam. But for SOR 2, for anyone watching that's doing it, it is 3 hours, so it's going to take longer. And I don't know, personally, I do like a past paper, and that was it for me. That was my study for the day. I couldn't do anything else because I was tired from writing an exam, and mimicking the conditions. So if you know that you're going to struggle with sitting a full past paper, that's so normal. I didn't even start off by like, I wasn't like, okay, all my study's done now, I'm going to sit a full past paper. I started doing it section by section. I was like, okay, today I'll do the short answers. And I was like, okay, tomorrow I'll do two sets of multiple choice from past questions. But my best advice to you guys is to just go through as many past papers as you can. Try as many multiple choice questions as possible, and I promise you, they ask the same questions in different words, and they just kind of like a recycle repeat, because they haven't changed the syllabus in so long. So you, at this point, it's almost like you can guess what the question's going to be, and you can kind of predict it. And the more you expose yourself to past papers, the less shocked you'll be in trials and HSC. Some people will come out of trials and HSC for SOR and be like, oh my gosh, like I was never expecting that. But the trials and the HSC, because the syllabus has not changed in so long, like they can't throw you off anymore. they've essentially asked everything, and it's just like, oh, what are they going to re-ask again? What are they going to recycle with different words? And there hasn't really been any times where there's been like really big complaints about something that Nessa's pulled off in the exam, only because it's been around for so long. So um, the exam has really just stayed the same in the structure of it, and they're not really throwing in like these wild cards. I think in that sense, SOR is just a very good subject because, contrary to popular belief, a lot of people think that it doesn't scale well, but it actually does scale pretty well, and it competes pretty well with some of the other humanities, like the histories. But on top of that, it is very very easy to get above 80, and above 90. It's really just on memorizing, and if you are losing marks on SOR, it's understanding content, just making sure you actually understand what you're writing about, and it's not just like you just know a definition and you haven't like linked it to the question. And structure, so it's kind of like English in disguise, with, let's sprinkle 100% memorized content. But we're going to go on with Aboriginal spirituality. So it is very important to know a definition of the dreaming, only because if you were to get a question on this first dot point, which is Aboriginal spirituality as determined by the dreaming, you'd want to start off with a sentence for your structure that defines it. So dreaming is a non-Aboriginal term used to encompass the complex worldview of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's a metatemporal concept that incorporates the past, present, and the future as a complete and present reality. It's inextricably connected to land and identity, and it's communicated through art, song, dance, story, ritual, and kinship. I think the most important part of that is the inextricable connection to land and identity. That is like probably the most important point from this entire syllabus, and it overlies everything, because when you are talking about dispossession and you are talking about land rights movement, the land rights movement, it all links back to identity and land, and how that stripped them of that and took them away from that, which is then affecting their relationship with the dreaming, and is just having that inextricable connection between the past, present, and future within their present reality. So underneath the dot point of dreaming, first comes the dash point of kinship, which is a highly sophisticated network of relationships traditionally accepted by Australia's Aboriginal peoples, including particular rights and obligations to the land or tribe. It includes biological relationships and totemistic relationships. It's connected to totems and expressed through skin names, which are both key to identity. It's a social organization and ensures the young and old are cared for, and it's a way of inheriting ceremonial rights and responsibilities. So terminology is really important, and this this was part of the notes of the marking center from the 2015 HSC short answer, where they said making specific reference to aspects of Aboriginal spiritualities rather than generalizations about land and dreaming. It is so important to have that like sentence about the inextricable connection, but you want to then prove that with the specific references, which you can talk about through totems and skin, and then an example of a totem and what a totem actually is, just as an example. So that's where terminology comes important, and where you can just show your marker that you don't just have like this really general knowledge, like you know it in a bit of better detail. So Mighty is the subdivision of an Aboriginal group into two halves so that privileges and duties can be organised, and there's a reciprocal responsibility held by both to support each other. Totem is an animal, plant, or land form that is the symbol of a specific spirit ancestor in a particular area of land. And they're split between the mighties to ensure a balance of use and protection. And it's important as the land and its resources are often featured in the dreaming, so that shows the inextricable connection to the land. And a skin name indicates a person's bloodline and conveys information about how generations are linked and how they should interact. So ceremonies are derived from important aspects of the dreaming, and ceremonies are therefore an acting out of the dreaming stories. It usually occurs at a sacred site, which is the importance of land, and this is why everything like is inextricably connected. And art communicates the dreaming, so stories describe Aboriginal law and lifestyle to children. So the role that ceremonies play in Indigenous society, so ceremonies are part of keeping the dreaming continuous in the past, present, and future. It's so that it's preserved and it's passed on for further generations. Ancestral beings are made present through song, dance, music, and objects of the ritual. So thus, the ceremony is not just simply the retelling of the story, but it's more like a reliving of the story, which is why it's so important that they have that access to the land. So for rites of passage to inform both the individual and the wider society of the new social fabric, and some rites of passage include initiation and funerals, which you can use as those kind of specified references that Nessa was asking to. Now, for obligations to the land, which is the final dash, it's got to do with how land is a dwelling and resting place for ancestral beings. So, learning of one's country is a lifelong process that involves great rights and responsibilities. Aboriginal people see themselves as part of the land and they believe they came from the land and their spirit will return to it when they die. And in the land, they also see evidence of the dreaming process. So, that's really got to do with the inextricable connection between dreaming identity and the land. If Aboriginal people see themselves as part of the land, then you can clearly see that the land is their identity and their identity is the land, and then how that's all contributing back to dreaming. So I think I keep going on about that one line and the inextricable connection, but it's honestly because my teacher drilled it into us back in the day, and she was a past HSC SOR marker, and she said it just has to be there. In this topic, like, you just have to talk about the inextricable connection because it's like the kind of underlying basis um, of the entire syllabus module. So obligations to the land really revolve around responsibilities of living with the land, including the conservation of the natural and social environment, which is done through instructions passed on from initiated elders to the next generation. And then Aboriginal artwork, song, dance, and ceremonies are all placed within the context of the natural environment. The colours are earth ochres, and tools for art are the natural objects obtained from the earth, and through that the land is inextricably linked to the individual, which is why individuals need to connect with the land regularly. And in this way, protecting the land allows for a continuation of life in a physical and a tangible sense, which is why the individual needs to have that access to the land. And that's how it then leads on to the land rights and dispossession when they were taken away from their land, and the effects of that. So even though it's looking at different dashes and diving into different elements of Aboriginal spirituality, at the base is land, identity, and dreaming. And you can see from that that all the dot points kind of flow on in that sense. So then it goes to dispossession. So dispossession refers to the forcible removal of that which belongs to another with a desire to take ownership and deny rights and access to that which was freely theirs to begin with. That's just the general definition of dispossession. Dispossession sought to destroy culture, language, law, and identity of the Aboriginal people. It also sought to destroy traditional structures of ownership, management, and inheritance, and it's responsible for a number of issues still present in Aboriginal communities, such as low life expectancy, overrepresentation in prison, and low levels of education. And that's all stemming from dispossession. So we're going to look at kinship group, separation of land, and stolen generations. Now, when you're using examples with Aboriginal spirituality, you want to incorporate specific ones to reflect your Band 6 understanding, which is what we were talking about before in that marking center feedback, to be more specific and not just making generalizations about the context. About the content, but the nature of Indigenous life actually means that examples and ceremonies are really going to vary depending on the country, so there's no generalized kind of rule. So if you are incorporating an example and mentioning the variety of existences, will signal to your marker that you understand that it's all encompassing, and the nature of the dreaming is all encompassing, but it is highly unique to the country. So for example, male initiation example that you could be is that ancestral beings ingest the boy and spew him out a man. For female initiation, after menstruation, the girl is bathed and painted in ochre. Funeral ceremonies, song and dance helps return the spirits to ancestors. Possessions are destroyed. And kinship, the mighty of the Guringai nation is crow and seahawk. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrect. But that's just an example of how you can bring in a specific example, and you can imagine how that's much better than just saying ceremonies and that dash. of ceremonies to the land. If you actually mention, for example, a funeral ceremony, that's going to show your marker that you just understand the encompassing but unique nature, especially if you mention the variety of existences and how they can differ depending on the country. Back to it with dispossession. So, the history of Indigenous people can be told as a series of examples of dispossession, warfare, and conflict. In some parts, massacres and large scale poisoning of Aboriginal nations occurred, and this genocidal activity caused the destruction of whole tribes because it was a genocide. Now, the effect of dispossession on Aboriginal communities has been enormous and long lasting, but dispossession refers to removal from family, which was a loss of self identity and a loss of spirit in life, removal from land, which then causes a loss of spiritual identity and a loss of purpose in life, and removal from kinship, which is a loss of human identity and a loss of relationship in life. So dispossession just led to a complete loss of purpose, of identity, of spirit, and of relationship, which is really the core of who we all are, which is why we study it. And I think that when we talk about the inextricable connection, we've got loss of self identity, spiritual identity, and human identity. So completely stripped them of their identity by removing them from their land, and from their family and from their kinship. So that's just another really important just an important point to note, and being able to distinguish that it wasn't just their self identity, it was their human identity, but also their spiritual identity and just those facets and the dimensions of that. So this was the direct result, and dispossession was the direct result of protection policies and assimilation policies, which were both government strategies. So, protection policies have the stated aim of removing Aboriginal people from so called unsuitable environments and placing them in the protection of the state by detaining them in homes or missions. So, they're more protected by being detained instead of their unsuitable environment, which is their land, which is inextricably connected to the dreaming and to their identity. While the assimilation policies had the aim of taking Aboriginal people, particularly those who were white passing, which they often called half caste, and had them assimilated into white society so that their Aboriginality would have been forgotten. And you can understand what effect that's going to have on their link to the land, but also who they are and their identity. And back to the dreaming, which is the all encompassing nature of the spirituality. So that's how everything kind of flows on, and it's really that flow and effect that this dispossession affected everything, their entire identity and their entire spirituality. So it separated Aboriginal people from their culture and religion, and from that, just their culture and spirituality altogether. It was hoped that by separating Aboriginals from their land, the culture, language, law, and identity would be destroyed because people were moved to reserves and government and church missions. And it had destroyed traditional structures of ownership, management, and inheritance because it created a lack of purpose, and it was an inability to draw an ancestral presence, especially when a lot of children were stolen and they couldn't, and they really struggled to draw back on that ancestral presence, and refine their mothers and their fathers and their sisters and their brothers. And separation from and therefore destroys traditional spirituality, and many of the rituals and ceremonies is inseparably linked to the land of a particular sacred site. So if you're separated from that and taken away from that, naturally that's going to destroy your spirituality. So, separation from kinship groups was the denial of the opportunity to express their religion and their spirituality through their community. It made it impossible for Aboriginal people to preserve their own language, and many lost their opportunity to participate in rituals. And like we saw before, the nature of dreaming is through ceremonies and is through the rituals. So that creates that sense of not belonging, and that's been one of the most major consequences. And many found it difficult to then reconnect with their kinship heritage and participate in the native title claims because they had been away from it for so long. And the responsibility for raising children was also shared within the kinship group. So when the children were separated, the parents, but also the wider community, lost connection with the children. So it was affecting everyone, and that's separation from kinship groups. So again, there's separation from identity, as totemic responsibilities linked to the land are disrupted and fragmented, and then the roles of elders is also undermined, and oral tradition and knowledge cannot continue because you're separating the streamline of continuance. And we've got this quote here where it creates a void where there's essentially like what's left. You've taken everything, and that separation from the land, and the land having such a core focus on identity and dreaming just strips, to turn it into this void and what they had done. So the stolen generations like is a flow on from this, and it falls under the policy of assimilation, where the World Council of Churches stated it represented a clear intent to eliminate an independent race and culture in 1971. Other policies include the Aborigines Protection Act of 1909, which made Aboriginal people wards of the state, and more broad missionisation, which was smoothing the pillow of a dying race. And we've got this quote from a mission. And Indigenous Australians would be classified as flora and fauna until the referendum in 1967. So they weren't even classified as people, they were classified as animals and plants, legally, until the referendum in 1967, which wasn't even that long ago when you think about it. And then they were first given the chance to vote in 1972. And then we've just got a little comment on why Whitlam's government had such an emphasis on Indigenous rights afterwards. So, though it's not explicitly in the syllabus, it is good to have an understanding of the longer term impacts of the policies, because you definitely could get a question that it wouldn't necessarily ask for the longer outlook, but it could imply it, and talk about like the effects of the stolen generations. And of course, you could talk about the effects of like the contextual effects of what happened then, but you would strengthen your response by talking about the contemporary effects of it now and how it's still appearing now. So, despite Indigenous Australians making up 2.7% of the population, they're overrepresented in prison, making up 20% of the population. That's one of the impacts of dispossession. There's also a 20% employment rate in the community, and this was pre-pandemic, with drug-related mental illness occurring at 5 times the rate of their white counterparts. And overall life expectancy is up to 10 years less, and only 1 in 10 Indigenous Australians are financially secure. So it's removing them from their families, it's removing Aboriginal people from their kinship groups, and it's also removing Aboriginal systems of responsibility and identity, which is why we put in that quote about that void, because once you've taken all this away, you've really left nothing, and it's very unfortunate. We've got this quote from the Anglican Church of Australia where they've said high rates of social dislocation and Aboriginal imprisonment is the direct result of the separation of children from their families in which the church was complicit, which is also, it is from the Anglican denomination, but it's showing that impact in the present, and how that the separation and how dispossession was the catalyst for this social dislocation and Aboriginal imprisonment. And these statistics and this overrepresentation today all comes from this separation, and all comes from the separation and removal from families, kinship, and from identity. From that, you then get into land rights, and that's how it kind of progresses in the syllabus. So the syllabus specifically asks you to look at 3 major developments, and it's just really important that you can distinguish between native title, Mabo, and WIC. But it is important to remember that these didn't happen in a vacuum. These were the very big cases, but the 60s, 70s, and 80s were really big periods of activism. And you guys probably would have studied in year 10 history, and possibly even earlier, the freedom rides and the referendum, the Wave Hill Walk-Off, the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, and all of those together raise the profile to the land rights, to the front of society, to then put in these major developments. But it is important to note, yes, there's the 3 that you study in SOR, but there was a lot of activism work going on that then allowed these to rise. Now, first is the Mabo case, which was 1992. It's really important that you remember the years, because in multiple choice they can give you the wrong years to throw you off, but also just for your short answer, if you do get a question on land rights, you'll just show much better knowledge of the syllabus by having the years of each of the land right development. So having native title 93, Mabo 92, and WIC 96, and just being able to show the development between time. But the first one that we look at in SOR is the Mabo decision, which was a land rights movement which overturned the concept of terra nullius, which is no man's land, and said that native title can be conferred to the land with continuing connection. And it acknowledged that customary law can exist alongside and be integrated into common law. So that was getting rid of that concept of terra nullius. Finally recognized that it wasn't actually no man's land, but legally that was written for so long, and that was a belief. So the overturning of that was so instrumental. But in doing that, how instrumental was it? It was instrumental because it did overturn the legal concept, but what change came after? And that's where we're going to look a little bit at WIC and how, even with the Native Title Act of 93, there's still some blind spots, and it's still an active, and to this day, it still is an active fight towards these laws. So, Native Title Act of 1993 provided a legal basis to implement the doctrines of Mabo. So Mabo kind of set the grounds, and Native Title Act put it into place, because Mabo was more about the overturning and the legal kind of language of terra nullius, while native title was like, okay, now we're going to put that into practice. And it determined how native title was formally recorded and the rights and the denial of land by colonizers. So it acknowledges the inextricable connection in common law and in harmony with Western notions of land ownership was really important. But by formalizing Mabo, it meant that applicants had to prove an enduring connection to the land, which is where it gets problematic, which is where I say like Mabo was really instrumental. And it's not that it wasn't a really great step forward, but just like Kevin Rudd's sorry speech doesn't just fix every single thing that's ever happened, the Mabo decision, it wasn't like that decision happened in court and then it's just done and the past has been made up for and everything's fine. And this is just an example of how it was problematic. So Indigenous society was oral, and there might not be evidence like deeds, but missionization and the dispossession also meant that connections to the land was broken. So it was very hard, and there were decades with no residents to prove it. So especially if you had been taken away from your land when you were young, how are you now going to prove that you have an enduring connection to the land when you've been away for it for so long? And that wasn't even voluntarily, that's involuntary separation from your land. And now they want this enduring connection that you have to prove. How? And the Aboriginal and like the Indigenous culture had such a focus on oral and on storytelling. So those physical proofs were hard to gain. So even though it was a step forward, it still was problematic in practice. And it gets a little bit more problematic when you look into WIC, which was 96. It was WIC Peoples versus Queensland, and it clarified some of the confusion that arose from Mabo native title. But it was specifically about pastoral leases and how pastoral leases could coexist with native title. And it's like, you know what, like native title and the pastoral leases, which are leases for farming or mining, can exist together and both can have it. But the issue with this is that if there was a conflict, and if there was some type of issue or dispute, the pastoral leases would extinguish native title. So the pastoral leases were still on top. So it's like, yeah, you can coexist, but if you butt heads, pastoral leases win. And that's just how it was. So even though it's a step forward and it's like, great, you're letting us coexist, um but pastoral leases are going to win, and the leases for farming or mining. So that did create a lot of controversy, which then resulted in the 1998 amended Native Title Act, which put further restrictions of public land that could not be claimed, and allowing states to extinguish any title if it was like national importance. So basically limited claims in the extreme, but still it's a consistent fight. But this is just to show you, I think, with the different acts, I think it's great to define it, but to show a bit more knowledge of it is where you can bring up the problematic nature of it or the controversy, just to show your market that you do know it in a little bit more depth. I think that is definitely in your interests. So we've got the 10-point plan from WIC. You don't have to memorize these. If you wanted to memorize one, you can have the National Native Title Tribunal holds absolute authority over claims for native title. but again, like native title belongs to Aboriginal people. So the fact that it is determined and was determined by court was quite a controversy. So even though it was limited, and it is fair to say that it was limited because there are limitations, there's controversial, and it's still problematic in its nature, the land rights meant that there was a legal way to claim connection with the land, and it marked a fundamental change in Australian law. And you can see the jump from 1967, where that was the first time they weren't seen as flora and fauna, plants and animals, and then by 1992 they're overturning terra nullius and saying um, that it wasn't actually no man's land, and then giving an opportunity, I should say, for access to native title. So even though it was limited, it was a fundamental change. And it's important to note that I feel like a lot of students will just write, it was a fundamental, instrumental change. It made such a difference. And even when talking about reconciliation, they'll go on about Kevin Rudd's sorry speech and really kind of argue the extent of change that it did. But realistically, that extent was limited, unfortunately, because of the conditions of law. But it doesn't take away that it wasn't fundamental or that it wasn't instrumental. It just could have been more powerful at the time if um, the legislation and the regulations weren't as constricting. But rekindling this connection with the land was the first step in returning to a sense of direction, purpose, and spirit for Aboriginal Australians. So being able to have and claim that native title and reconnect with the land and rekindle it was the first step. And I think that's really important when you're looking at this topic, to see that it wasn't like, okay, you know what, Marlborough decision, that's fine. Like, yep, like we've achieved it. We've made up for the past, we've got reconciliation, everything's fine. It's really important to see these as all stepping stones. And even when you're talking about reconciliation later in post 1945, it is still stepping stones, and it's going to keep being stepping stones. So it's in returning to a sense of direction, purpose, and spirit for Aboriginal Australians. The Dreaming made these claims possible with stories, songs, knowledge, and sites constituting evidence of connection, which was good because they could use elements of their culture to then prove their connection. But it is quite unfortunate that that law is going to overturn and terra nullius and say, yes, it was your land, and now they're saying, oh, but you have to prove that to us. So you can understand how it can be limited, and I think just something like that, and having that understanding, a lot of teachers will kind of skip over it, and they'll kind of just be like, okay, this was Vic, this was Marbo, this is what happened. But just being able to counter it and look at the limitations of it as well, you can bring that up in reconciliation as well. So I think it's a good point. So overall, when you look at it, all of them really do flow onto each other. And it's really that last steps and those last two steps of self-determination, and then going to reconciliation, which we look at in post 1945. So let's try this sample multiple choice question. If anyone's in the in the live chat, sorry, I'm having like, if anyone's in the live chat, you can have a go. So which of the following statements is true about Aboriginal dispossession? So A, that it ended the policy of assimilation. B, that it reduced the importance of Christian missions. C, that it limited access to land in rural areas by mining companies. Or D, that it disrupted the inextricable connection between land and kinship. So when you guys have a think, process of elimination is so important here, but also think about the syllabus. Remember what I told you, where a lot of the questions and a lot of the answers come straight from the syllabus. It's your big hint. But in this case, it would be D. So you're going to use the process of elimination, and you're going to also look for key terms that you recognize from the syllabus, because they can be included. Not always will, but they may be included. And in this case, they were. And it is true that Aboriginal dispossession disrupted the inextricable connection between land and kinship. Now, saying that Aboriginals' dispossession limited access to land in rural areas by mining companies, that works more for the Wick decision rather than dispossession. Reducing the importance of Christian mission and ended the policy of assimilation, it comes, I guess, for dispossession, well, it's not true to say that it ended the policy of assimilation, because they work hand in hand. And it didn't reduce the importance of Christian missions, it increased it, because that's where they were separating and taking Aboriginal peoples too. So that's why elimination is going to work in this case. Let's look at this one. We cultivated our land, but in a way different from the white man. We endeavour to live with the land, they seem to live off it. It's a quote from an Aboriginal elder. But what does this quotation best express out of the following? Does it show the stories of the dreaming, responsibilities to the natural world, social expectations and group norms, or changing the mindset amongst non-Aboriginal people? I'll give you guys a second to read it. I really recommend reading over it again. And remember, we endeavour to live with the land. They seem to live off of it. So have a little think, and hopefully you got B. So rereading the quote can really show that, and I think that cultivated our land and endeavor to live with the land really shows the natural world and the responsibility to that. And you can recall that they're linking back and referring to that point of Aboriginal spirituality. And final one, I swear, I love SOR. I'm not going to sit here and hate on it, but like it does get boring. It can get dull, and questions like this is where I'm just like, I don't know what to do, because they're definitely much harder when like the both statements and like which one's true, which one's false. When you do get a question like this, read each one and write next to it, like on your paper, like T or F, just so you know. And it's so much easier to choose it, because not like identifying it can really confuse you. So let's look at the first one. In the Wick decision, the High Court first recognized that the term terra nullius was not an appropriate description of the land. Now think about the Wick decision. Does the Wick decision have to do with terra nullius, or was that the Mabo decision? And the Wick decision was about the pastoral leases. Have a think. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. And statement 2 says the Bringing Them Home report was the first legal recognition of Aboriginal native title. But that was about the stolen generations. And how is that a legal recognition of native title? So when you put it together, it's actually B, and they're false. So the tip here is that the Wick decision's got to do with pastoral leases, while Mabo was terra nullius, and therefore both of them are false. The Bringing Them Home report was released in 1996, and it was a pivotal moment in the controversy that had come to be known as the stolen generations, but it wasn't the first legal recognition. So therefore both of them are false, and that's why looking at them in isolation can really help out. Okay, we're going to continue with our course study crash course, so let's keep going. Now, when we're talking about changing patterns of religious adherence, Australia 1945 and post, like at that time, was monocultural, monofaith, monoethnic, and that's why you see such a difference in the statistics, and we're about to go through them. I'm so sorry. While Australia 2020, Australia 2021, 22, and now in 23, multicultural, multi-faith, and multi-ethnic. So what we're looking at here is why that pattern of religious adherence has changed and how we see evidence of that. So one of the biggest patterns of change has been the decline of Christianity. In 1945, 88% of people were Christian, and only 0.5% of people stated otherwise. But by 2016, it had already dropped to 52.1. That shouldn't say 2017. That's an error. I'm so sorry for that. That should say 2021, because that is the recent census data. But the recent census data had 43.9% for Christianity and 38.9% having no religion. So when you look at why this has happened and what actually changed dramatically changed Australia's religious landscape, comes down to the dashes of denominational switching, immigration, secularism, and New Age religions. Secularism is a very big one though, and I really recommend knowing it in quite some detail. So this was a graph that I found on the census data page. If you guys are struggling with the census data, it's actually pretty summarized on the census page. I tried to look for some notes to see if there were any online that were updated, because a lot of the SOR notes have the 2016 census, and that's what I wrote about in my HSC, because I sat my HSC in 2021. So the census data hadn't actually been released yet, and even last year students were still allowed to write about the 2016 data, and there's nothing wrong with writing the 2016 data, but you should be using the most recent one, which for you guys is all going to be 2021. But if you did want to find those, it's actually really simply condensed and summarized on the census data page. So just search religious affiliation Australia 2021 and it'll give you the stats. But I wanted to show you this graph because It shows, first of all, the decline of Christianity between 71 to 2021, and that is a massive decline, but also the increase of no religion, which is secularism. And you can see how close secularism is to overcoming Christianity and the trend there, how Christianity is consistently declining, but secularism is on the rise. Now, two important trends that we just identified was that Australia is becoming secular, and the popularity of the dominant religious traditions in Australia is shifting significantly. So even when you compare the difference, we had 30.1% identifying as non-religious in 2016, but already at 38.9 in 2021. So that's a very, very big increase when you're talking about a whole population. So let's look at why Christianity is the major religious tradition in Australia. Will it continue to be, not at the decline that it's going at, the trends that we're seeing for the next census, but we'll see. But it was the major tradition in Australia because of colonization, and when Australia was colonized by England, it's important to remember that they were a devoutly Christian country, so that influence is going to flow on. Now, the gold rushes of the 1850s and 1870 brought in heaps of Christian British people. The White Australia policy also kept out other religious traditions until it was dismantled in 1973, and that's when immigration schemes came in and other religions were brought in. But up until then, the White Australia policy really kept religion and Christianity really tight within Australia. Now, after the aftermath of World War One, immigration from Britain wasn't just encouraged; it was also assisted and made easier. And that's why you look at immigration as a dash point. But Christianity has built up a strong infrastructure as well, and there's a lot of Christian schools, there's Christian universities, and all the different denominations, which is why it still is the major religious tradition in Australia today. Now, why it's declining in popularity, it differs. The number one thing is increasing secularization, and you can see that in the graph, and that's why I put it in. As Christianity continues to decline, more people are becoming secular. But realistically, there is a lot of dissatisfaction with traditional faith movements. There's an aging membership because a lot of Christian adherents are now aging, and as they get older and as they unfortunately pass away, so does the religion. And there's also a lack of migrant intake these days when you compare it to the immigration rushes that we had after the wars. And then there's a decline in regular attendance of religious services. So Sunday is no longer observed as a day of rest. When you go to specific European countries, there'll be no shops open on Sunday because it's a day of rest, and they're pretty strict and have quite a large amount of Christian adherence. But Sunday isn't observed as a day of rest for us. Um, Attending services also has become kind of burdensome to some. There's disillusionment with church institutions, but also a shift in how social interactions take place. And obviously, as we have different social issues like abortion and euthanasia, which Christianity and the religious traditions are going to have differing opinions on. A lot of people and a lot of, let's say you were a Christian adherent, but you don't really agree with that, you can definitely fall into that belief of like the disillusionment and not really feel like Christianity is aligning with your beliefs and values. Then comes immigration. So immigration impacts the current religious landscape and brought in a lot of the different denominations, but also a lot of other religious traditions. So post World War II, Australia underwent a massive change because it allowed 1.5 million British nations to migrate. And from 1945 to 1975, our population grew to 13 million, but most of it was European migrants from the Baltics, Eastern Europe, and Southern Europe, which led to the growth in Catholics and Orthodoxes. But because the White Australia policy was only abolished in 1973, religious diversity wasn't really enabled until then. So after 1973, that's when migrants from Vietnam, China, Cambodia, and Thailand introduced Buddhism. Hinduism was brought from India, Sri Lanka, and Fiji, and the first significant Muslim migrants arrived in 1967, and since then, Muslim immigrants have come from Lebanon, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, and Pakistan. So that's just some examples of how the other religious traditions have all come in from immigration. So immigrations, it's important to remember that it's impacted the current religious landscape and link it back to Christianity about how from 1945 to 1975 because there were a lot of European migrants coming in. And a lot of Europe countries do have a strong Christian influence. They were bringing in their different denominations, such as Catholics, and that's where you can talk about Serbian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, for example, because that aligns with the European migration. But you can also talk about how by abolishing the White Australia policy, there was more religious diversity enabled for Buddhism, Hinduism, and Muslim migrants. So this is a graph from the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, which shows the top 10 source countries of migrants from 2014 to 2015. And we just have this in here just for you guys to see where different countries and what different countries are bringing migrants of what religious tradition. So we've got India for the highest in this graph, who are bringing and spreading Hinduism. China is spreading Buddhism. The UK, we know, is spreading Christianity, and so is the Philippines, and so on. So that's just I feel like sometimes seeing the visuals makes it make a little bit more sense. So realistically now, I hope you can see that our current religious landscape is multi-ethnic, multi-faith, and multicultural. Now, how and why has the religious landscape changed because of denominational switching? So I'm so sorry, guys. I know this I know this topic gets dull, and it's literally just content. But you really just have to understand it. If you can make these connections, you're completely fine. I feel like it's one thing to memorize it all, but like to just sit with it. It's not hard to understand, don't get me wrong, but there's just a lot of it. So just being able to make connections wherever possible is definitely worthwhile. But denominational switching has got to do with the transfer of adherence from one Christian denomination to another. And it's far more common in Protestant denominations than it is in Catholic or Orthodox groups. They might switch factors because they might like a minister or the style of worship or the sense of community. Maybe it's close to their home or the activities that a certain congregation provides. But there's also increased mobility where it's easier to travel to a church if you wanted to go to a church an hour away rather than just walking to your local parish church because there wasn't as much mobility back then as well. So some denominations are also seen as more liberal, and some will allow female ministers, while others are seen to uphold the more outdated and traditional hierarchical structures. And that can also lead to denominational switching, to be with a denomination that appears more liberal. Identification with the Anglican faith has continued to drop at the fastest rate, while the Pentecostal faith has continued to increase at the greatest rate. So New Age religions come in, and they're increasing in popularity, and we want to look at how that's impacting the religious landscape. Now, New Age religion is literally just like an umbrella term, and it's just the range of spiritual beliefs and practices. All you need to know for New Age religion at the core, like defining it, is that it's fostering individual fulfillment, and it's very big on the individual. Young people specifically are very kind of encouraged to explore new ways of thinking and understanding, which are outside traditional conventions and religions and their code of behavior, which attracts a lot of young people towards New Age religions. And it can be followed as an alternative to or in conjunction with other more traditional religious practices. So you can follow a New Age religion instead of following a religious tradition, or instead of following a religious certain practice, or you can still, for example, pray and still be engaged in following a New Age religion and kind of have those practices in conjunction. So the main thing to remember is that New Age religions are individualistic and liberal. They tend to be spiritual rather than communal pursuit, and they relate to self-improvement and self-fulfillment. This can include numerology, astrology, yoga. I've just got some examples, but I do recommend to memorize like 2 or 3, just know like some examples of New Age religions, just because it's one of those things that you can do just to show your market that you know a bit more. We've got this question, but we're not asking on Slido. But if anyone wanted to comment, you don't have to if you don't like. But if you do follow any New Age religions or spirituality, you can tell us in the live chat what it is, and what it brings to your life if you like. But again, no one's forced to. I'm not really sure what's going on in the live chat, so we'll see if it's even going off. We'll see what's happening. Now, there's a wide range of New Age religions, and many followers want to connect with nature or like a life force in like a spiritual way. There's also the belief that the potential of the human being and a desire for understanding of oneself in the universe. So it's very big of like who am I and my purpose in the universe. And a reason for the growth in that is disillusionment with traditional religion, its forms of worship, kind of frustration that things aren't really changing. It's very big on a desire to seek personal fulfillment and seeking inner peace and health. Awareness of the globalized world, the ease of travel now as well can expose us to more, just more new age movements, new forms of global communication, but also a lessening of commitment to traditional structures such as Christian churches, and all of that together are contributing to the growth of new age movements. Now, you don't have to memorize all of them. I say memorize three. I think the disillusionment with traditional religion, desire to seek personal fulfillment, and new forms of global communication are probably some of the stronger ones, but it's up to you what you'd like to memorize. And in many ways, it's really a direct response to the growth of secularism. So here we've got the Mind, Body, and Spirit Festival, which has 91,000 attendance when we were doing research. So that's just an example of the growth and kind of the increase in New Age religion. Now, the rising interest in secularism is because of the belief that religion should not be interfere or be integrated into the state. So increasing secularization is indicated obviously by people responding no religion. Many feel a disillusionment with religions because they feel like actions of maybe a particular person or a belief of that religion is then inconsistent, and that might be because they believe in science or that they feel that the church is out of touch on current social issues such as homosexuality and women's rights, which we were talking about before. But churches still will play an enormous role and still do play an enormous role in the provision of education, health facilities, and welfare, which is really important to note. So the key to this is that concepts of individuality and following one's personal ideas is more essential than those of a group or an organization. And in 2005, 2008, 65% of all marriages were non-religious, and 9.6 of people chose not to answer the question of religion in the 2016 census. So I think that's just something important to note. But the rising interest in secularism kind of aligns with the growth of New Age, and both of them kind of have that same kind of disillusionment where it's like we don't really fit in, and there's no really like belonging, and this doesn't really align or mirror who I am. Then we get to ecumenism, which refers to the movement towards religious unity amongst Christian denominations. It promotes harmony, understanding, appreciation, and respect. It acknowledges the unity in Christ, and that outweighs the diversity in practices and beliefs. And it's to oppose sectarianism, which is division and conflict between groups within the same religion. So for the ecumenical movements, it's so important to remember that it's all within Christianity and it's all within the one religious tradition. So in 1977, several Australian churches combined to create the Uniting Church. Guys, I literally only put this in because I've seen it in, I think, two papers now. I think I've seen it in HSC and I think I've seen it in one trials, and it just traumatizes me every single time I see it. I'm like, I will not let anyone get this question wrong. Because it is an example of like ecumenism and churches coming together, because the Australian churches combined. The Uniting Church today is comprised of the Congregational Union of Australia, of the Methodist Church, and of the Presbyterian Church, which united all together under the Uniting Church to promote dialogue for the greater good. So then there's the National Council of Churches Australia, which is the umbrella organisation uniting many of Australia's Christian churches. It's comprised of Catholic, Orthodox and Protestant variants, and they can assist the community in issues of faith and unity, gender issues, Indigenous people, social justice, and international topics. It works with state councils as well. And it's associated with the International Focused World Council of Churches. And just some examples, they have been outspoken about Australia's involvement in the Iraq War and the refugee policy. And they even created the National Program on Refugees and Displaced People. And that's all the churches coming together towards that. So those are just some examples, but it's really just emphasizing the similarities and appreciating the differences rather than having all this sectarianism and all this kind of conflict and dispute. So that there, and the National Council of Churches is for all of Australia, while the New South Wales Ecumenical Council of 1982 is 16 member churches of the three Christian variants. and it aims to further Christian unity by enabling members to address causes of division and to pray and worship together. So it still very much is kind of mimicking the National Council, but it's specifically within the state. And again, there's the 16 member churches. So an example is that they have called in Australian government to address climate change and other environmental concerns. So they're putting aside their differences and using their similarities for social change and for the better of others. Now, a lot of people get ecumenism and interfaith dialogue confused. Ecumenism is like everyone is Christianity solely, and the sectarianism between them and trying to overcome that. Interfaith dialogue is interfaith, so going in between the different religious traditions. So it's a formal discussion aimed towards developing greater mutual understanding and acceptance. It's really the same thing, except this time it's not just the different dominations of Christianity, it's the different religious traditions. So it's Islam and Christian and Judaism, for example, all coming together for social change and for working together on common projects and standing united. It does provide an opportunity for people of different faiths to understand each other, and I think that's definitely really important because there is common ground, and that's where the golden rule of all the religious traditions come in their similarities. We've got some different examples, but it's up to you which one you'd like to do. I think we have some more on this page, but here's an example. There's the Center for Christian Muslim Relations, which is promoting positive interactions and collaborations between Christians, Muslims, and members of other religions to build harmony, respect, and understanding. And they give talks and they run educational seminars for schools, and they have tertiary level academic courses on Islam and on interreligious dialogue, which is really important just for increasing awareness and understanding, which can then hopefully lead to greater peace and harmony for all. So that's just an example. We've got the golden rule here because that's the base of the religious traditions and just kind of shows their similarities, even though worship style and everything may differ. That doesn't change too much. Now, the multicultural landscape means interfaith dialogue is really essential for creating mutual respect and tolerance, because you want to minimize misunderstanding so that you can have that social cohesion. And especially in an increasingly secularized society, and as secularism continues to rise, interfaith dialogue kind of unites the religions together to discuss those common issues like dignity, justice, and peace. So the last point of this has got to do with Aboriginal spiritualities and religious traditions in reconciliation. So reconciliation is a form of acknowledging past wrongdoings so that forgiveness and healing can take place. It's reconciliation for stealing of the land, suppression of Aboriginal culture, stolen generations, erased link to heritage and identity. These are some examples of reconciliation between the religious traditions and Aboriginal spiritualities. I know in my trials I wrote about the Week of Prayer, where every year since 1993, Jewish, Islamic, and Buddhist groups observe a week of prayer specifically for reconciliation. So they're coming together and doing that prayer for reconciliation. And again, we've got that quote from the Anglican Church where they recognized that the overrepresentation and the social dislocation of Aboriginal people in imprisonment is a result from dispossession. But you can also, and a lot of people do talk about the formal apology to the stolen generation. Now let's look at this one. Which of the following is a common characteristic of New Age religions? Is it A, that they value ecumenism? Does that make sense if they're a New Age religion? Is it B, that they all reject materialism? Is that true, or are there some New Age religions that are just about materialism? Is it C, that they focus on the spiritual needs of their adherents? Or is it D, that they integrate all non-Christian religions into a common set of beliefs? And for this one's C. Now, it's not going to be D because it's not just non-Christian, it's the other religious traditions as well. You can't say that it rejects materialism because there are some New Age religions where it's just about materialism. And ecumenism, if it's a New Age religion, why would they value the connection between Christian denominations? Like, this just doesn't make sense, which is why just knowing the definitions, I think, is so important. Let's look at this one. Since 2001, which of the following churches has been the least affected by denominational switching? For this one, we've got B, and you're going to use the process of elimination. So it's not going to be A because that was only founded in 1977. You're not going to say C because Anglican is decreasing at the fastest rate. And you're not going to say D because that's been increasing at the fastest rate. So when you're talking about denominational switching, Catholic is definitely the answer for this one. Guys, these are also all past HSC questions. And I'll leave this one up to you guys to put in an answer and then we'll go through it. It's another one of those statements because I'm feeling love and I'm like, let me give you the harder questions. So we've got this one. The Anglican Church is the largest Christian denomination in Australia. Have a think about that. And then look at this one. The majority of Presbyterians, Methodists, and Baptists merged to form the Uniting Church in Australia. That's why I told you that fact comes up. I put that on the doc. But is that the true fact or is it making a mistake? I don't know. So have a think about that and think, is the first one true? Is the second one false? Have a little think. And when you're ready, and hopefully if anyone wanted to comment, the answer is B. So Catholicism is the largest Christian denomination in Australia, not Anglicanism. And this is where they throw you off, and you might think like, oh no, like the second one's true, but it's the Presbyterians, it's the Methodists, and it's the Congregationalists, not the Baptists, that merged to form it. And that's a mistake that can be made, and it's literally the first two are right, but the second one, like the third one, and the Baptist is where they switch it out, but it sounds right. Very easy mark to lose, and you wouldn't even realize it. So that's why I put that in there. Anyways, guys, we're going to move on to religion and peace. So if you are not doing SOR2, you can just not worry about this. I am going to go back to structure and kind of structuring responses on some of the core religions, but for this next section, it's just really going to quickly talk about religion and peace in case anyone here watching is doing SOR2. So religion and peace has a few key ideas to balance, which seems really stressful at first. But realistically, it's just sacred texts, teachings of peace, inner peace, and world peace. Peace comes up in every single dot point. So religion and peace is literally about peace, and I really recommend structuring your paragraphs based on peace. That's because sacred texts feed into the teachings, and you guys would have seen that in your depth studies as well. Like the sacred texts contain the teachings, which then feed the conceptions of the world, and in this case for religion and peace, feed into inner peace. The most important thing to understand, the connection between inner peace and world peace, is that if you have inner peace, you are contributing to world peace. If we all had inner peace, the most peaceful world ever. And it all starts with the individual. So by attaining inner peace, you can then go out into the world and contribute to world peace. And that's why they say like people who are in like low points in their life like are going to drag others down, and they're obviously contributing to a lack of world peace. But if you are in peace with yourself, you're not going to feel the need to judge others, to gossip about others, to hate on anyone. And by doing that, you're contributing to world peace. Live, laugh, love, peace. We love peace here. Anyways, unlike your ethical teachings, your teachings aren't the topic or thesis of your paragraph. It's actually peace. So you can split it up nice and easily. It's up to you. You can do 2 paragraphs on inner peace, 1 on world peace. You can do 2 paragraphs inner peace, 2 on world peace. It's up to you. And you can still signpost your primary teaching. You want to link like a primary teaching about peace, but I think having it based on inner peace or world peace instead of here's a paragraph on this teaching and let me kind of link it, I feel like it just works a lot better for the module and how the syllabus is formed. Other than that, the structure within the paragraphs is fairly similar. So it's what's the teaching, where does it come from, what's an example in the religious world, and how does it really link to the religion's paradigm and the big ideas. Contemporary links are really important. So making those real life and real world links are a general way to kind of boost up your marks and sit you at a band 6. And in religion and peace, if you don't include contemporary examples, it's not that you can't, like, you're not going to pass, but for the band 6, it's what they're expecting. And it just shows real knowledge of, especially like examples of that teaching and how it's contributing to inner peace, and real examples of contemporary inner peace and contemporary world peace. So I really like to think back to year 11 SOR when I'm talking about religion and peace and all the focus on like what makes a living and dynamic religion, because that all overlaps back to kind of those contemporary examples, and like how do we live out this religion and what adherents can do in their everyday life to live that out. Now, if you didn't want to structure it by piece, and if you're planning on structuring it by teaching, that's also fine. But I just recommend picking two key teachings of peace and then discussing how it can achieve both inner and world peace. So if you are going to have one paragraph on one teaching and another paragraph on another, just make sure within each of them you're linking it to inner and world peace. And naturally, inner and world peace are always going to interline because you have inner peace, you're contributing to world peace. And a good response kind of synthesizes the methods, and they link inner peace to world peace, and they kind of separate the teachings to show that they all achieve the same goal, which is peace, but also just the overall paradigm of the religion, which is like the main like big belief and kind of like the core values. We're going to look at an example. So there was a 800 user who actually submitted this example essay. But if you wanted more examples, we have a lot online, and people are just kind of submitting their past work. But this is an example of one for religion and peace about Christianity and Islam. You can see that they're um, talking about how it promotes an understanding of peace through its teachings, ethics, and rituals amongst its adherents. It's bringing up the Bible and the Quran. And linking them, and then it's also linking it to peace. As well as this, the peace teachings also encourage Christians and Muslims alike to work for world peace to make the world a better place through various religious groups and organizations. Then it starts with kind of like a thesis statement about the sacred text. Then it's getting into the Christian teachings, and then it's got the Christian quote. This one actually specifically, if I'm looking right, is specifically on Christianity. So it's up to you if you'd like to do it this way, or if you'd like to go back and forth. Like you could bring in this exemplar here. I think we have, no, just the one page. This exemplar here is putting all the quotes together. So it's got both Christianity quotes, and then it's got the next two Islam quotes within the same paragraph. But if you wanted, you could go one Christianity quote, here's the difference, or here's how Islam does, and here's another Christianity, and here's how Islam. But that's also not necessary. Another option to do, and what I did, I just separated my paragraphs. So I just had one full paragraph on Christianity, and then I did Buddhism and Hinduism. So I had one paragraph on Buddhism and then another paragraph on Hinduism. So just to revise your content, we're going to look at some possible options for Islam and Christianity. So this is where, even if you're not doing religion and peace, and if you are in SOR1 and you've kind of zoned out for a couple minutes, welcome back, because all of this is going to overlap. So for Christianity, the paradigm and the kind of big belief is the love commandment and building the kingdom of God, and that Jesus loves all. The teachings are very much to emulate Jesus through a submissive love, recognizing that Jesus does value peace and the love commandment, and achieving God's peace as well. So that's kind of like the main paradigm. Inner peace in Islam can be seen through prayer, which can be done through informal and formal, which can link to singing as a form of prayer in more modern denominations. Sorry, I'm talking about Christianity. That's prayer in Matthew, and it can be singing and chanting, but also through the Eucharist that can contribute to inner peace. But for world peace and real life examples that you could bring up are the World Council of Churches. You could talk about Desmond Tutu, Pope Francis. You could talk about interfaith peace services, and just any collective example of peace. So this is an example of where this is like the contemporary examples that we're talking about. So for inner peace in Christianity, it would be prayer in the Eucharist, and then we've got the World Council of Churches and how that's contributing and showing that people who have achieved inner peace through prayer and through the Eucharist can then come together through these collective groups to then offer interfaith peace. And for Islam, the paradigm is submission to Allah, and that's a lot of the time when you're writing about Islam. Like I don't think I did Islam for our 20-mark essay, and I don't think there was ever any essay that I wrote that didn't have this line, because it is the paradigm. The teaching is that Allah is the source of peace, and that Muhammad is the module of virtue and peace. So you can, if you guys wanted any quotes, we've got a couple on here that you can use from the hadiths. But inner peace, contemporary examples include the pillars of Islam, and you can have even specific examples, while world peace comes more from community. You can talk about the World Council for Muslim Interfaith Relations, the Center for Christian Muslim Relations, um, and yeah, you can talk about the misconceptions of the faith when talking about the community and achieving world peace. There's a lot you can do, but just making sure you're linking in that and how that can all refer back to religion and peace. So let's get on. We're going to finish up this lecture with structure and then just some general tips. Now, for structure, you kind of want to follow this pattern. Um, you want one body paragraph for each contribution or specific aspect or specific ethical teaching. I really don't recommend doing like multiple ethical teachings in one paragraph. Just split it up. Split it up for your short answers, for your even your essays. Don't well, unless the essay question is asking, like if the essay question is asking for um like multiple and it's an integrated question and it wants your practice and it wants your ethical teachings, fair enough if you need to pair two together. But for especially for your short answers, just separating them is just so important. Each paragraph should have a new point, and you should be losing at least two quotes, which are from your sacred text. If you're doing Christianity, it's Bible or a church statement, for example, just kind of mixing it up. You don't have to use the Bible every single time. You can use quotes from important figures. The topic sentence does have to relate to a main idea, and you want to finish every paragraph pretty conclusively where you have some final judgment or summary, but it's just really important, and these are the most important things that you do in your response to just stand out to get that band 6, is to link it to the impact of the modern day religion and the contribution to the development and expression. And a lot of the times that'll be in the question, so this is kind of stuff that you can prepare and do some practice work on. The prescribed practice to significance and better connection, and the teaching of contemporary issues. So if you are talking about when you are looking at the ethical teachings of whether you're doing environmental ethics or bioethics or whichever dash you're doing, it's so important to link it to contemporary issues. Personally, I did environmental ethical teachings and we did that across all three of our depth studies. And I just had animal rights, what else? Global warming, and just had a couple contemporary issues, and then had ways that adherents could fight those by using their faith as a guide in their beliefs. So roughly, you want to follow this pattern. I put this one in case any of you are studying this significant person in Islam. But it's just really got the structure where, again, with significant person as well, it is not a Wikipedia slab. It's really important to remember that it's not just like this biological slab and they don't actually care that much. Definitely have the year they were born and the year that they passed away, just like this. And if you are going to bring up something, make sure that you're linking it to your point. So here we've got, during Shafi's time, there were two conflicting schools of Islamic jurisprudence, and he used the qiyas for decision making, and the school which used the Quran and Hadith. So that's linking his contextual and his background to the point that you're making, and then the quote that you've got from the Quran. So everything just has to link. Like in saying that, I just mean don't just kind of like name drop random biological facts. It's just not necessary, and it won't get you these marks. You definitely do need like their birth and their death date, and I think one to two kind of contextual facts, but only if they are linking back to it. This is a significant practice paragraph. So if you guys were looking at weekend worship, this is an example. It's got the quotes, it's got the analysis. Yeah, pretty good topic sentence. To go straight into it, I honestly feel like you can low-key use Peel. I feel like SOR is really just English, except you're doing you've got like the memorized religious content, but otherwise the writing style and your structure is very similar, and you want it to be really concise and really apply. Like you've got your topic sentence, you got your link, you're linking back to the question. It really is that way. If you guys did need a quote, I really recommend, honestly, if you are doing Christianity, I recommend Matthew 28-19, which is baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son of the Holy Spirit, only because that also overlaps with the principal belief of the Trinity from year 11, which is a good point to bring up. And if you did want to get some brownie points in SOR, bring up some of the principal beliefs if you remember any, and if it's useful and if it connects to the to your point. But even here, they're talking about how it reflects the belief of the divinity and humanity of Jesus Christ through the weekend worship, which is a principal belief, which is just chef's kiss. We just want to impress our markers as much as possible. Now, in terms of a note structure, it's really up to you what you want to do for your notes. I know that this is a popular method, and kind of like, okay, this is the point, this is like my individual, this is the practice I'm going to focus on, this is the quote, this is like my modern interpretation of it, and this is how I'm going to link it. Personally, though, for me, what was working best was just kind of having all my notes and then practice questions. I didn't, like I said, I didn't really sit many questions and many papers in full. I really recommend that you do at least one full paper before going into the SOR exam, just for your own security and for your own timing, just so you know that you can finish, because you don't want to lose easy marks because you didn't get to finish half the essay because you didn't try to practice like writing out an essay and sitting the paper in full. But it's up to you how many you want to do. I think just before trials, 100% do one. And in terms of your notes should just really be a guide. Um, but you're like the best study you're going to get in SOR is from doing past questions. And it's not because it's not as much, I feel like, in other subjects. Like in every subject, past papers are going to be like number one, like best study technique to use. But in SOR, and I feel like compared to other subjects are very big on application. I think if you were to compare, for example, biology and SOR is much more in memorizing, and you can get more marks and get away with memorizing rather than having really good application skills. While biology, you could memorize everything, but if you don't understand it and you can't apply that knowledge to what the question's asking you, it doesn't matter that you've memorized it. Like, it's not going to do you any justice. That's the benefit of SOR, which is that even when you've memorized it, in terms of applying it and the actual application, it really only comes in with structure. Um, so I'm hoping and I'm sure that a lot of you guys are achieving pretty well in SOR, and if not, I promise you a little bit more study for trials will help get you there. We're just going to finish off with some hot tips. These are my tips. I'm so sorry. There's honestly like SOR, I can't even waffle if I wanted to. Number one is finalize your notes and try to get it down to summaries. Like I said, you do not need 20 pages on Aboriginal spirituality alone. You don't. We just went through a summary and you saw you just don't need as much as you might pressure yourself into think you needing. And remember, the most you can get is a 5 marker. The absolute max in that section is a 5 marker, so you don't need to know this great detail. You do need to know great detail for your in-depth studies and your depth studies, but you don't need it for the section. And again, that's why I feel like past papers, I want to stop talking about it. But it is so important because it refines your writing and exam management skills. It also highlights to you what you don't know. And like I said, questions in the HSC are recycled, so past papers are just really going to help like that. And last is memorizing your syllabus. It is just such chef's kiss. Chef's kiss. If you guys want, I've posted fill in the blanks for, I think, legal, bio, and business studies on our A Notes TikTok. But if anybody's interested in, and if anyone feels like they would use an SOR one, please let me know, and I will jump on that and make that for you guys. And if you do have any SOR content that you'd like to see, if you liked how we did like a really quick summary, and you ever wanted like, let's look at like the environmental ethical teachings of Christianity in 1 minute. If you wanted a video like that, or if anyone has any specific videos, even for other subjects, please just leave it in the live chat. I'm keen to hear. But otherwise, thank you guys a lot for coming to the lecture. My only other real thing to say is that the syllabus, like I said, hasn't changed since 2009. There's even more. Like, there's also, on top of this, there's also the 2022 paper you can do. So there's no excuse that you can't find a practice paper. If you're not bothered sitting it, don't sit the full thing yet. Start sitting sections. Just please, for me, guys, just sit one timed practice before you go in. I only say that because I don't want any of you going in and the first time that you ever try finishing the paper is the day of trials. A lot of people do come out of trials really upset because they don't end up finishing, and I mean that for all of your subjects. Try to just sit at least one. I know with past papers it's hard to sit down. Maybe not for everyone. Maybe some people find it really easy and they're really used to it. Personally, for me, it was a struggle. But if you can just do at least one, just so you know which section is the easiest to write. If you can, maybe you can get multiple choice really done and it saves you and you can have a bit of a longer essay. I'm not sure. It really depends on you. In terms of doing the exam in order, it's always a question I get for SOR lectures. I think you should just do it in order. Honestly, I know some people are like, oh, but like, what if I like forget my quotes? Like, they'll come to you. If you really, really feel desperate with quotes and you're really not sure and you're really memorizing them like up until the last point before your exam, which I obviously don't advise, but if that is you and if that does happen, because we all have those moments and I've done that in English, then do your depth studies and like whichever sections are going to involve your quotes. But the only thing with that is that it's very easy to get like very caught up in those and then kind of neglect the short answer and the multiple choice, which you don't want to do. So if you feel pretty confident with it and you're like, yeah, I'm ready for SOR, just follow it in order because it's written like that on purpose and everything's building. It starts pretty good with the multiple choice and you get a 5 marker, then you're jumping into the short answers and then you're going into the essays, which so everything is kind of progressing and it's all getting you ready. Um, but memorizing the syllabus and practice papers will really help you achieve that band 6 result. Honestly, when I saw my 94, I was very happy with it. But I was just surprised because I just didn't think I was always aiming for like a 90. But it was weird to see 94 because when I think about SOR, I studied for it the least. And that's not to sit here and flex. And it's like, yeah, I didn't study for SOR and I got a band 6. It's not, I promise you, it's not to be like that. But compared to my other subjects, I was putting in the least work in the way that I kind of just had my notes, I memorized it, I memorized the syllabus, and then I did practice questions. I had some flashcards with like my quotes and like my sacred text references, but otherwise, like I just feel like I always just put SOR to the side, so I was definitely surprised when I got that mark. But if you guys are doing well in SOR, and I assume that quite a few of you are, it's definitely worth doing well in. It really helped my ATAR. I thought, like, I don't know, I was always under the thought that SOR does not scale well, but it definitely scaled well and definitely helped me. So I really do recommend just putting in a bit of effort. Now, up to you if you really want to kill SOR and you wanted to get full marks, like that's up to you. You can really smash it out, and it is very achievable to score above 95 out of 100 on this exam, only because the only places you can really lose marks comes down to structure and application because content wise it's all there and it's pure memorizing. But that's up to you guys and how you're going, and also with your other subjects, because it's very important to keep those in mind. I'm going to wrap up the lecture here. But if you guys have any questions, please keep asking. Still be on the live chat to answer anything. But I hope you got a lot out of this. We're going to host another SOR lecture right before your HSC in September. So if you are interested in coming again, we'll go through even more content and honestly try to get through most of, if not all of the content and just do like a really general summary. But I really do recommend just downloading these slides. I apologize that in the beginning it was kind of just like, here's the core, let me teach you everything that you've got from the first part of the year. But you can use that just to go back to your notes and add any points if you like by downloading the slides. And remember, this slide is recorded so you can access them again. But thank you everyone for coming. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. I'm sorry that I poured it down your throat to memorize the syllabus and to sit past papers, because I seriously hated getting advice about past papers because I really did not like sitting past papers. So trust me, it's not nice that I sit here now and I'm telling everyone do past papers, because I used to hate hearing that advice myself. But I really promise you it's just in your best interest for timing, but especially within SOR. In other subjects when it's still relatively new, it's not as effective. But in SOR, you guys can see all of these um, past exams, like naturally questions are going to repeat. So you will get a better mark the more that you expose yourself to and the more that you practice. But that's it from me. Thank you guys for watching.